Saudações, amigos de Portugal, desde o outro lado do mundo. Também saúdo nossos amigos do Brasil. Oi, gente. É uma honra para mim participar deste encontro online. Neste momento, presido o Comitê Latino-Americano do GIEX. Quero contar um pouco sobre a liberdade que nossos povos latino-americanos lutam para preservar. And I will switch to English now, as I'm not that confident with my Portuguese. So the information I want to share with you today is part of a document that was prepared in 2020 in the context of COVID-19 for the Latin American grassroots community. And a general revision of the historic background of education in Latin was introduced in the document, and following a summary of the laws regarding education and homeschool. Just a little bit to let you know about me, that's my family. We live in Bolivia, which is in the heart of South America, and that's the document that we prepared for that time. I was co-founder of the Homeschooling Bolivia and another global movements, and currently I am chair of the Latin Committee for GEX. Now, let me give you a little context before I go deep into the legislation thing and the freedom fight. Although there are schools for technological training, Latin American countries have not yet legally recognized subjects that students need in current context. Topics that have been talked about for decades, like soft skills, ICT preparedness, global citizenship, environmental and ecological sustainability, mastery, or at least knowledge of computer programming languages are not yet part of the school day by day. In summary, education has not changed in Latin American countries for the last 300 years. So this orientation is clearly reflected in the legislation for education in our countries. Laws in the region abound in definitions on roles and obligations of state entities and explains in depth who teaches, but little or no emphasis is placed on who learns. Very few laws present even a student profile or specify the participation of families. In contrast, there are Asian laws that put all the responsibility for education of the next generation in the hands of family, like the so-called no-school law in Taiwan. Latin America had a chance to change its legislation during COVID restrictions, which was the perfect context to make the necessary changes. But virtual education never quite applied, even though it soon became apparent that a new paradigm was needed because the traditional class did not work in virtual mode. And as pressure on governments grew due to the pandemic, more and more states found it necessary to regulate online education, adjust or change their laws in order to respond to the need to provide education. So they created new laws, sent kids home, and called it homeschooling, which caused a lot of confusion for everyone. And I know you've been there too. I remember some of our talks about the time. So my number 2 point is that the earliest precedent of favorable regulation towards homeschooling is probably Chile. And its legislation allows homeschoolers to home educate under certain parameters. Measurement or evaluation of results before state entities, that's one of the parameters, under the so-called free student modality. And they can certify basic or secondary level of high school and continue upper studies with a state certification. However, the Chilean homeschool community do not consider that their country has specifically regulated homeschooling. In the understanding of Chile's leadership, there's a legal void regarding homeschooling. And that in fact, more than 50% of Latin American countries are in the same position. Of course, now we understand that regulations do not equal freedom. But this mirrors the first question parents always ask when considering the idea of homeschooling. Is it legal? Is that not the first question we're all asked? And that brings me to my first point, which I want to stress. Latin American homeschoolers do not quite understand the very concept of freedom. They need to be taught that we are all born free, right from cradle. And that's something you in Europe understood very well because you had the nice detail of leaving it in written form for the next generation to come, which I applaud. The clairvoyancy of writing down such basic principles for times like these when people don't really know even these self-evident truths. I know. Now, this is probably linked to our past. After all, most nations in Latin America, if not all, began as colonies from, well, you guys in Europe. So our oldest memories are related to being someone else's property, or being under someone else's protection. And I believe some Latin people, some Latin folks have never actually left the medieval, as they still yearn for someone else to take care of things and make the choices for them and just tell them what to do. But that's part of our challenge. The fact that we come from that point makes a clear case that we ought to move forward and outgrow our childhood as nations. I want to give you a quick example about this, wanting someone else to be in charge. As I understand, you're now celebrating freedom right now in Portugal. I can relate. We had a soft revolution in 2019, and we had a strike that lasted, a national strike that lasted 21 days. And the entire nation went on strike opposing a dictator-like ruler who wanted to run for a fourth time for president, even though our constitution said that he could only run twice. The revolt ended up with the former president running away. But before that happened, there was an interesting phenomenon occurring. In social media, folks would ask, why does not USA come with helicopters and abduct this guy? He's a well-known drug dealer and tyrannical. Where is the help? Who is coming to help us? They would even ask to be invaded. Why doesn't all the other countries invade us and free us? And here, I mean, this social media, this with the younger kids asking these kind of questions. At a certain point, the healthiest thing happened to us. We realized no one was coming to the rescue. It was on us. We had to defend our freedom or just be ready to lose it. And I think homeschoolers lack this realization yet. To some level, it is on us. We are the ones who have to defend our freedom, or they will take it and deprive us from it. So legislation, and clearly the idea is to always keep the range of educational freedom as open as possible, in paper as well as in practice. And that might not always be possible, but we'll try anyway. And here we also have the international treaties, of which we should know by heart Article 26, paragraph 3 of the Human Rights Declaration. That's highlighted that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. In October the 21st to 23rd in 2020, the regular session of the OAS, Organization of American States, was held virtually, ratifying the treaties that protect human rights, including the right of parents to decide on the education of their children. That's a precedent that homeschooling families in many countries use to defend their right to homeschool their children. Under the principle of international law, pacta sunt servanda, treaties must be fulfilled. Every state has the obligation to abide by the treaties it has signed. In Latin American countries currently, international treaties have the same binding force as the constitutional text, especially those referring to human rights. That is a strong tool we try to teach families to use to defend their freedom. Even though the laws in the nation in terms of education place all the responsibility of planning, executing, and certification of the studies of citizens in school age on the shoulders of the state, even though that fact, and despite the fact that legislation mentions families, but in practice, families have little or no involvement in their children's education, Latin America is a society-based organization, is based in society. Families are strong here. Families are still strong here. For Hispanics, family is the strongest value ever. That strength has been tested during the long quarantine, in which families had to be together longer than ever in modern history. And in this context, many families have discovered the weaknesses and cracks of the traditional education system. And so more families than ever are turning to homeschooling. And we're doing our best to teach them that that's okay. That's their right and civil freedom. Now, I want to do some remarks before I go to another point. There's a context now that was still in play while this document was being drafted. Political context. In the last 2 years, with the last election in Colombia and Brazil, the entire continent bloc has been consolidated. All governments in Latin America are left-winger or socialist right now. And traditionally, socialist ruling is contrary to educational freedom. The tendency is generally to control and to use education as means of indoctrination, and countries that have followed this line of thought have even gone so far as to abolish private education in order to have complete control over the training of the following generation. And here, Brazil is an important chapter for us to review. They are our continental heroes. Although its law favored compulsory schooling and home education is penalized, Brazilian civil society is the one who has led the most lawsuits against the state for the right to educate their children at home, and the one that are winning the most. This brings me to my second point, which is maybe there will not be better times than these ones. Yes, the entire continent is a socialistic bloc. Yes, some of the laws that they are passing weaken family. And yes, the control of governments are becoming not only strong and aggressive, but clearly intrusive and oppressive. But parents are awake and conscious, and our numbers are increasing unceasingly. So one lesson we still need to consolidate is it's on us to defend these freedoms, and we cannot wait until the times are better. They might not be better ever. What does that mean for a regular mom or dad? Times might not get better, and you need to defend your freedom. Well, first of all, learning their rights and exercising them. The best way to keep a right is to use it. And understanding that freedom is not asked for, it's defended. Because we're born free, out of our human condition, we need to defend our freedom, for that is the best we can do for our children and their future. So very quickly, I want to check the 3 paradises of homeschooling in Latin America and the 3 legislative nightmares. And then I want to make one more point and I'll be done. The 3 paradises for homeschooling in Latin America are Mexico, Colombia, and Honduras. Mexico has 3 instances to certify by the end of primary school, secondary school, and the end of entire school. The state has provided formal offices to do those paperwork. In Colombia, there are several official certification places and ways for homeschoolers to certify their students outside the system or after the entire school time is gone. And Honduras has a law that is the fruit of 30 years of lobbying by civil society. It acknowledges parents, so we applaud them all. We celebrate what they have achieved. The nightmares are Costa Rica, where there's a chance to go to trial if people find out you're homeschooling your kids, possible jail time and fees. Also Cuba, people has been put in jail for homeschooling their kids. And Brazil, that I have already told you. The rest of Latin American nations do not have jurisprudence on this matter, and they do the best they can to protect their civil rights and strengthen their communities. Lots of laws in Latin America establish the obligation of parents to register their kids in school. Some even mention attendance. However, the constitutional level where the preferential right of parents belongs is that of the international treaties, and it's called the ground norm. And also the national constitutions of countries belongs to the same level. So no general educational law is above the mentioned human right. In most countries, educational laws are in the 3rd or even 4th level of priority, below constitutions, and sometimes only as ministerial resolutions or federal state policies. This means that in those countries where compulsory school attendance is mentioned in a ministry law or a state regulation or a federal educational policy, that obligation is not greater than the mentioned constitutional right. This particular right is specified in the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, and it also mentioned in the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the ICESCR. And now most countries acknowledge the Declaration of Human Rights as a kind of universal ethical code. And that's the last thing I wanted to bring to your attention. Actually, my third point. If not legal, it is ethical to homeschool your kids. And I want to make a short remark. We are aware that states will still regulate homeschool because it's their job, and we're preparing for that. And what's more, we have realized that it's important for us to partner with the private education sector, helping them to understand the risk they run if the country follows certain legislative trends. Private education is contemplated within freedom of educational choice, just like religious education. As homeschoolers, we have in Latin America twice warned the non-homeschooling parents that have their children in the traditional school system about threats that they were coming on them, like the Abjam principles and the ESI, the comprehensive sexual education laws that were being implemented. And we have fought with them side by side to resist these onrushes. I want to finish telling you about one thing that happened to me during the 2020 year. I was in the minister's office, Minister of Education office, and I told him that the beauty and the weakness of homeschooling was its remarked personalization, which greatly complicates evaluation. And the answer of this man, who was then the Minister of Education, but had been a former president of my country, was, well, everything great is complicated. And that's what I want to finish with. I want to tell you, we're doing something great. You over there and we over here. And what unites us is that we have decided that this is the way we want to go. This is the way we want to defend, or we will defend, the freedom of our children. Not only our freedom, not only the freedom for us in our time as parents to educate our children, but the freedom of our children, that we're going to leave a legacy in their hearts and minds, that they are free from cradle, from their birth, and they are free to choose this way or another way to educate their own children when the time comes. So I want to encourage you in doing that. I want to thank you because we have learned that from you. You can be proud of us, following your example, following your steps. And I want to not to ask you, but to tell you, don't give up. Don't give up fighting. Whatever happens in Europe inevitably comes this way after. That's not the reason. I just want you to know that if you fight, know that we're also fighting behind you. We cannot say we have your backs because we have still lots to cope with. There's needs in Latin America. We are still countries in third world countries. But we want to tell you, do not stop fighting. Do not lose courage. And try to keep your freedom as long as you can. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.